No matter how attentive a movie crew is, in terms of lining up shots and matching the continuity, blunders are always bound to happen. And that's certainly the case with these horror films. This subject has also been covered in a previous list which you can check out right here. But for now, I am Gareth, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 more horror movies that accidentally film things you weren't supposed to see. Number 10, Lurking from Below, The Descent. The Descent is filled to the brim with scenes designed to cause nightmares. The opening jump scare, the den of bones, the heart-wrenching ending, at least in the British version. Also, let's not forget about the moment when the crawler pops into frame unannounced. Even before the main ensemble encountered the carnivorous troglodytes, the tension was through the roof since there was no mistake that something was definitely lurking in the caves. As such, it's tempting to scour through every single frame, hoping to catch a glimpse of these subterranean critters. In doing so, something else entirely can actually be found hiding in the caverns. Around the 25-minute mark, one of the characters ignites a flare, illuminating the terrain below. A humanoid figure can be spotted in the bottom left, which appears to be a crawler. At first, this seems like a genius usage of foreshadowing, since the prehistoric savages haven't been officially introduced at this point. In reality though, this entity is just a crew member who happened to be on set while the camera was a-rolling. Reshooting the sequence didn't seem necessary, as this unintended gaffe just amplified the creep factor in an already gripping scene. Lemons and lemonade and all that. Number 9, The Third Arm, Seven. Although David Fincher's Seven has plenty of haunting imagery, there's one particular moment that's sure to be at the top of the pile. In one of the earlier scenes, the detectives Somerset and Mills burst into a rundown apartment hoping to find the elusive serial killer John Doe. Instead, they discover one of his victims, a skeletal addict who's been starved, tortured, and maimed over the past year. As Somerset shines his flashlight on the man, known as Sloth, it's clear he's had his arm cut off. Or so it seems. Every time there's a shot of Sloth's upper body, the actor's real arm can be seen semi-tucked into his sleeve. It's most noticeable when Mills places a handkerchief over his face immediately after walking in. The hidden limb can be spotted again straight after one of the characters yells, "He's alive! He's alive!" Although the room is dimly lit, the actor's real arm definitely stands out, since its smooth complexion jars with the rest of his body, which is infested with infected welts and bloody sores. Once you see it, you will never unsee it. Number 8, The Hand Push, Jurassic Park. Even though Jurassic Park isn't technically a horror, Steven Spielberg's sci-fi masterpiece has more pulse-racing moments than a dozen slashers put together, so we're putting it in this list. Once disaster hits the prehistoric park, there's a terrifying sequence almost every 5 minutes, often involving a frilled lizard or an eardrum-shattering T-Rex. Then there are the velociraptors. After 2 of the Cretaceous fiends break into the facility, Tim and Lex hide in the kitchen and shut the door, believing they'll be safe in there. Oh, how wrong they were. Unfortunately, the raptors are much smarter than anyone imagined. After a few moments, the toothy beasts figure out how to turn the door handle, allowing them to burst into the room. Well, maybe burst isn't the right word, since one of the snarling critters is blatantly pushed into the kitchen by a crew member's hand. Yep, there it is. What's worse is this mishap is super easy to spot too, since the velociraptor is in the near center of the shot, and the camera lingers on the creature and the human hand for a solid 3 seconds. Still bloody terrifying though, isn't it? And while we're talking about monster horrors, I want to know what is your favourite monster horror movie of all time. Let me know in the comments section down below. Number 7, Boom Mike in the Reflection, Child's Play 2. Mirrors are difficult to work around when it comes to filmmaking. While recording a scene with a reflective surface, the crew need to position themselves in a way so none of them or their equipment is visible, since it could ultimately ruin the entire shot. And sadly, the crew of Child's Play 2 ran into this problem. In one scene, a rebellious teen called Kyle heads to the house of her friend Joanne to warn her about the killer doll Chucky. After entering the bedroom, Kyle is horrified to find Joanne has already been murdered. What a nightmare. And just when things look like they could not get any worse, Chucky bursts from the bedsheets and attacks her. Although mirrors appear throughout this fight, the crew were largely careful to remain unseen, except during one shot. After Kyle bumps into Joanne's corpse, the boom mic crops up in the mirror on the right. It's a mistake that's almost impossible to miss since the mic pops up beside Kyle, who the audience should be fixated on during this moment. But since Child's Play 2 is a pretty goofy flick anyway, this flub isn't enough to ruin the experience at all. Number 6, Strings Definitely Attached, Candyman. In this underrated gothic horror, a graduate student called Helen is studying the urban legend of the Candyman, a vengeful spirit with a hook for a hand. After Helen tries to discredit the myth, the Candyman attempts to kill everyone connected to her to perpetuate his legacy. Despite having only less than 10 minutes of screen time, Tony Todd literally kills it in this role. Thanks to his commanding presence and intoxicating voice, the Candyman is utterly captivating every time he appears. Well, usually. When Helen is framed for the Candyman's murders, she's seized by the authorities and placed in a psychiatric ward. While she's tied up in the psychiatrist's office, the enraged Phantom frees Helen from her restraints, and without any warning, the Candyman is sucked out of the window, ascending into the sky. Annoyingly, this sequence is not as cool as it should be, since the wire pulling Todd through the window is very much visible. Since the Candyman has a habit of appearing and disappearing on a whim, his glorified exit here just wasn't really needed, was it? If the deranged spectre just vanished in a less dramatic way, this blooper could have probably been avoided then. You live you learn, eh? Cheers for checking out this list, my frightening friend, and if you're enjoying what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below for more What Culture horror stuff in your day. Number 5, The Tape Markers, Shaun of the Dead. Although Shaun of the Dead is recognised for its sharp writing and hilarious performances, the filmmaking aspect also deserves a ton of credit. After all, every joke and gag is accentuated by the flawless editing, the sharp transitions, and the impeccably shot scenes. Especially that iconic fence sequence. Having said that, a couple of errors still ended up in the final cut. Immediately after learning of the zombie uprising on television, Shaun and Ed turn to their doorway to see an undead groom looming toward them. As the pair scream at the top of their lungs, what would you do? There's a shot of 2 blue lines on the floor. To the untrained eye, there's nothing out of the ordinary about these markings, right? But anyone with a basic knowledge of filmmaking should know what these lines are, and more importantly, why they shouldn't be visible. While setting up a scene, tape markers are attached to the floor, so the actors know exactly where to stand. After the cast rehearse the scene and memorize their movements, the tape is usually taken away. At least it's supposed to be anyway. Although tape marks are visible in other scenes, including when Shaun is whacking zombies on the street, they're most noticeable during this particular shot. It still doesn't change the fact that this one is a horror comedy all-timer though. Number 4, Somebody Smoking, Halloween. It's hard to comprehend the effect John Carpenter's Halloween had on the world of cinema. The horror indie didn't just kickstart a 40-plus year franchise, but also served as the springboard for the slasher subgenre. Though the original has some minor gaffes, they can be generally forgiven since they don't really stand out too much. However, there is one issue that definitely deserves a special mention. While Laurie Strode walks through Haddonfield with her friend Annie Blackett, she sees Michael Myers before he steps behind a hedge. But when Annie inspects the area, Michael is nowhere to be seen. After Annie turns around to speak to Laurie, a wisp of smoke billows from the left side of the screen. Although the smoke doesn't exactly ruin the scene, at all, there is a funny story behind its inclusion. While recording this shot, a crew member just decided to light up a cigarette, causing a puff of smoke to float in front of the camera. And the culprit was none other than the director himself, John Bloody Carpenter. I know, I'm as shocked as you are. Number 3, Fading Out, Dead Ringers. Any film helmed by body horror auteur David Cronenberg is expected to contain some surreal imagery, and 1988's Dead Ringers is no exception. However, one of the film's strangest visuals was actually an accident. The psychological drama centers around 2 gynecologists, Beverly and Elliot, both portrayed by Jeremy Irons. The optical effect works for the most part, to the point where it looks like Irons is really interacting with a long-lost twin. It's damn impressive. However, there's one moment where the illusion is completely shattered. In an early scene, Elliot is speaking to Beverly at their clinic, asking him about his tissue rejection data. After that, Elliot walks out of shot, and supposedly all of reality. Due to a composition error, Elliot seemingly fades to nothing as he strolls away. Anyone who picked up on this vanishing act during their first viewing may have thought it was some sort of clever foreshadowing that Elliot was dead the whole time, or he only exists in Beverly's mind. Considering how strange Cronenberg's films are, this twist would actually be on point. But no, Elliot's dissolving effect was nothing more than a visual screw-up. Number 2, The Fog Machine, Insidious. since the days of Dracula or Frankenstein. Smoke has played an instrumental role in cinema, especially when it comes to elevating tension. For this reason, it's no surprise that many horror productions employ their very own fog machine. When a movie character explores a mysterious dwelling or encounters a supernatural force, a seeping mist is sure to appear to get hearts a-pounding. And one film series that regularly utilizes this classic technique is Insidious. In the first installment, Josh's son, Dalton, is abducted by a demon and banished to an astral dimension called the Further. After being placed in a hypnotic trance, Josh is able to project his consciousness into this nebulous reality. And as he makes his way up a stairwell, Josh locates the demon's den, which is sealed behind a mysterious red door. An ominous fog begins to fill the room, of course, which is fitting since the tension is at its peak. But while shooting and editing the scene together, nobody seemingly noticed the smoke machine was in the shot. Not only is the device visible at the bottom left, it's possible to see a crew member bloody operating it. But if the camera zoomed in on Josh just a little bit more, this flub could have probably been averted. Hell of a mistake. Get it? Oh, I have so much fun. And number 1, who's that on the ground 28 days later? In Danny Boyle's non-zombie horror, Great Britain has been ravaged by a virus that turns humans into mindless savages and Olympic sprinters. But 28 days later isn't just a nail-biting experience, it's also deeply heartbreaking. A moment that's sure to stick in anyone's mind is when a survivor called Frank is exposed to infected blood, transforming him into a flesh-eating monster before his daughter's eyes. And just as he's about to attack her, he's shot dead by a team of soldiers. Although this sequence is absolutely riveting, there's one moment that lessens the impact. As the survivors gaze at Frank's corpse in horror, the camera zooms out, revealing a camera operator on the far right. If he was barely visible or only appeared for a split second, this discrepancy could likely be forgiven. Unfortunately though, the crew member is fully visible for a good few seconds there. His presence is so obvious that he could be mistaken as one of the soldiers if it wasn't for the gigantic camera in his hands. Like many of these entries, even though this flub doesn't completely ruin the moment, it is ironic how the biggest blunder occurred in the movie's most emotional scene. Such is life, eh?